Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the 7 steps of scientific inquiry. And so sometimes you'll also hear this called the scientific method or the scientific process. And so it goes by a couple of different names. There's sometimes slight different variations of the steps, but the goal is ultimately all the same. We notice something, we're curious about it, we want to learn more about it, and we create ways to learn more about it, and then we come up with some sort of answer at the very, very end. Really, you can think of the scientific inquiry process as almost problem solving. Okay, these are steps that we fairly naturally go through. And I think that's the big piece I want you to be thinking about as you watch this video is how does this relate? How does it, sound similar to if you have a problem in your life that you're trying to solve? How are these steps pretty similar to the steps you might take if you have a problem? Because that's all it is. We have some sort of problem or some sort of concept or idea that we want to, fix or learn more about, and we go through a certain amount of steps to help us along the way. So the first step that we have is we observe and question. And this is a lot of times how we start, we notice a problem. And a lot of times we'll have these things called I wonder statements. That's a really good way to kind of start that process. And so the step that you wonder about how something works, that's all the step is. You notice something and you're curious. Step one is all about curiosity. So an example you might have is I noticed that the leaves are beginning to change color and I wonder why. And that's something that we really notice this time of year since it's starting to be fall, and you see these leaves changing color. And that might be something like, why does that happen every fall? What is the reason for that? And then you could go through some steps to figure it out. Step two is our research. So, just like if you have a problem, you notice something, your next step is generally to figure out as much as you can about it, right? Try to find possible answers, try to find out more information to solve that problem or answer that question, that thing you're curious about. And so you're going to research. So, it's a step you find out as much information as possible about your question. Sometimes you answer your question in this step, and then maybe you're done. It doesn't go on to all the other steps. It kind of depends. Maybe you find that answer of why leaves are changing color, and that's good enough, and you can just stop there, right? This step is helpful as you need background information to help create your experiment, right? If you're actually going to create steps to solve this problem, to answer this idea or question, you need to know what you're doing, right? So you need to have an understanding of those ideas as you go through that experiment designing. If you have no idea how to, go through that experiment, how to use some of the equipment, what the data might mean, then it's really hard to create an experiment that's going to actually answer that question. So an example is I could research color change patterns in trees throughout the year. I could start looking into, okay, what are some things that people already know about this topic? Step three, hypothesis. So a hypothesis, all it really is just a possible answer. Okay. We may have a lot of answers. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. That is okay. A hypothesis isn't about being right or wrong. It's about having a potential answer, something for you to test. And that's the big piece. And so, in creating a possible answer, in creating this hypothesis to my initial question, you're going to have two things. You're going to have an independent variable and a dependent variable. Okay, so we just kind of want to focus on that. You'll have an independent variable and a dependent variable. All right, and now I did forget to include it here, but a lot of the times your dependent variable will also be called not the manipulated, the responding variable. So sometimes you'll see responding variable instead of dependent. Your independent variable can sometimes be called the manipulated. Okay. Was abbreviated frequently with IV for independent variable and DV for dependent variable. Whatever your independent variable is, or your manipulated, okay, that's another term that you will see. It's whatever you are deliberately changing in an experiment. So this is the thing that you are choosing to change. You're manipulating it. You're causing some sort of change in it. Your dependent variable or your responding variable is the thing that you are typically measuring in that experiment. So when I'm trying to identify these things in a lab, if I'm asked, what is the independent variable? I ask the question, what am I changing? The answer to that question is your independent variable. For my dependent variable, I ask the question, what am I measuring? That's your dependent variable. Usually with a hypothesis, now we're on the second bullet point on the screen, usually an if, then, because format. So what that means is if you look at the sample one that I have, we have if the color of the leaves are changing, then it is fall because it is common for trees to change color in the autumn months of the year. All right, so really how that format works is we say, so if our independent variable, if the color of the leaves are changing, then we have some sort of, okay, this is what we'll see. This is what we can measure, our dependent variable. And then we give an explanation as to why we think that's true. You especially need that if-then piece. It's almost like a cause and effect. All right, and we'll continue to practice this in class as well. Step 4. This is the part where you're actually doing the experiment, designing the experiment, things like that. So up until this point, we've just been essentially had a question and researching and designing, right? So this step is where you create your experiment. So for example, it should have a data table to organize your data and a procedure to follow and replicate the experiment. And we do want to pay attention to, there is the little typo that should say data, not date. Okay. So those are the two main things you really need to have. You need to have some sort of data table, like I have in the top right-hand corner, or that's just a sample of a data table. They come in all shapes and forms. And then again, a procedure, right? Almost like a recipe. Okay, a procedure is essentially a recipe for our experiment. Step 5, so this is when we actually follow that procedure. So it takes all the way to step 5 out of the 7 until you actually conduct the experiment. And that's where you collect the data. So this is the step where you actually do the experiment. You collect the data following your procedure carefully. Okay, that's really important because what happens is a lot of times when you go through a study, if you were to, like, if you're a scientist, things like that, or anyone conducting a study, sometimes people want to say, hey, I want to see if I can find similar results to you. So they redo what they do. They basically follow your recipe, they follow your procedure, and they see if they can replicate, they can duplicate your study, and then that adds more evidence to your ultimate claim. And so you want to make sure you don't go away from your procedure, otherwise that makes your possible answer less valuable. It doesn't make it as strong, right? There's less evidence for it. And then there's an example of a data table on the bottom. Maybe I collected information. Maybe I was looking at 4 different tree types, and I looked up the percentage of leaf color change, and those are that's the data that I found. Step 6 is our analysis. Okay, we don't form any conclusions. A lot of people want to start concluding things about their study. They want to, give all the answers at this point. But all we're doing is we're just reporting the data, and we're not saying what it means. We're just saying, here's what we found. We found this percentage of tree changed leaves at this time of year, right? Something of that nature. This is where you'll also create a graph. So you can again see a sample graph that I have. And you kind of say, what is your data saying? What trends do you have? Things like that. But you're not explaining why the data is that way. That comes in step 7, your conclusion. And this is where you start to kind of almost have a discussion with whomever is looking at your study. And so this could be in a written form, this could be a verbal discussion, and this is where you determine what your data means. So if we do have this information, what does that actually tell us? You want to back up those conclusions with data. So we're going to say, okay, we think this because 1, we found this, 2, other people are saying the same thing, which means we have multiple sources telling us that this information is correct. We want to share our results. All right. If we find something out, we want to share that with the people who want to read it. And there's a lot of different journals and publications that you can use to share your results with the world so they can double check your work, so they can learn from it. That's the whole point, is to learn new information. We talked about we will talk about if you accept or reject your hypothesis. Was your hypothesis right or wrong, and why? Okay, remember, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Okay, sometimes it's really exciting when you have an incorrect hypothesis. And if it is right, why is it right? Back it up with information you found in the lab. You also want to offer possible improvements to the experiment. So if people do it again, you say, you know what, we ran into this issue. This is a possible way you can make it even better, right? That's really, really important. And then I have an example there below. I'm not going to read through all of that. You can absolutely read through that. I'm going to move myself here so you can actually read through all of that. And so then that's, kind of how that all works. So in summary, we'll see on the top, you can see this is labeled as a scientific method. That's the same thing. Okay. And we have observe and question. We have a research. So we have observe and question. We have research. We make our hypothesis, our possible answer. We design our experiment. Now we collect our data. We look at, okay, what data do we have? What is it showing? And then finally, what does it all mean? And was our hypothesis correct or not? So this is kind of the summary of what we have. We're going to be doing a lot of different experiments throughout this year. And so we'll be going through the scientific inquiry process a number of times. If you have questions, absolutely let me know. And I look forward to going through the scientific inquiry process with you.